Hi, I'm Mandy Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington REALTORS legal hotline lawyer. And this video is another in our series describing the forms revisions that took effect March 3rd, 2021. And today we're going to talk about computation of time. And the good news about this video is that everything you already know about the computation of time provision hasn't changed. We didn't change anything about how you count days under the statewide forms when you start at mutual acceptance or any other time in the agreement and move forward on the calendar towards closing. We didn't change any of that. So everything you already knew, you should still know. All that we did with the computation of time provision is add a mechanism for counting backwards. Why would you need to count backwards? There are some forms in the statewide form system which require you to start at closing and count days backwards on the calendar to figure out when something has to happen. For example, Form 35, the inspection contingency, says by default that seller will have any repairs seller is going to make done by not later than 3 days prior to closing. So you'd have to start at closing and count backwards 3 days to know when seller's repairs are done. Form 21 says that every buyer has a right, a 5-day right, prior to closing to conduct a walkthrough of seller's home. So you have to start at closing and count backwards 5 days to know the first day that buyer could do that walkthrough inspection of seller's home. And another example is Form 22EF, the evidence of funds addendum. And if you look at that addendum, line 29 identifies the date prior to closing, or the number of days prior to closing, that if buyer has disclosed a reliance on contingent funds, then by this day identified on line 29, buyer must have converted their contingent funds to non-contingent funds and deliver notice to seller that buyer has converted their contingent funds to non-contingent funds. And buyer brokers, if your buyer misses that deadline, the seller has the unilateral right, no notice or opportunity for cure, to terminate the purchase and sale agreement. So buyer brokers, what that means is that you've got to know how to count days from closing backwards to the number of days identified on line 29 of Form 22EF, so that at the time of mutual acceptance, you can, at that point, look at the date of mutual acceptance, look at the date of closing, project forward all the way to closing, and from that point, count backwards so you can mark your calendar for the date that buyer's proof of non-contingent funds is due to seller, because buyer brokers, if your buyer misses that deadline, the seller has the right, without giving your buyer any notice in advance, to terminate the transaction. Can't run that risk. You got to know how to count days backwards. So how do you count days backwards? Start at closing, and the first day of your time period is always the day before closing. Just like when you count forward, days of 5 or time periods of 5 days or less include business days only. Time periods of 6 days or more include calendar days. So when you're counting backwards, if you're counting a 5-day period, you will not count the weekends or holidays. You will skip over those days and count only the business days. So for example, if you're counting a 5-day period from Friday, day number 1 of your 5-day period would be Thursday. So Thursday is day number 1, Wednesday is day number 2, Tuesday is day number 3, Monday is day number 4. You're not going to count Sunday or Saturday. You skip over both of those days. Day number 5 is Friday the week before. If you're counting time periods of 6 days or more, then you count calendar days. So what happens if you land, if the final day is a weekend or holiday? Because just like when you're counting forward, no time period can end on a weekend or holiday, even when you're counting backwards. If your final day is a weekend or a holiday, all right, I'm not going to call it your final day, I'm going to call it the last day of the time period. If the last day of the time period is a weekend or holiday, then you stop counting backwards at that point, and then you move forward on the calendar to the next business day, and that day is the final day of the period. Again, you're counting backwards, and if you're counting 6 days or more, that means you're going to count weekends and holidays. So if the final day of your time period, if the last day of your time period is a weekend or holiday, you're going to stop counting backwards, and then you're going to move forward on the calendar to the next business day, and that next business day is the final day of your time period. Let's practice. Let's assume you're counting line 29, form 22EF, which is 10 days by default. So your buyer has to provide proof of their non-contingent funds 10 days prior to closing. And closing is going to be, you look ahead on the calendar, closing is going to be on a Wednesday. Wednesday is your closing date. Day number 1 is Tuesday. Day number 2 is Monday. You're going to count Sunday, you're going to count Saturday. Friday is day number 5. Day number 6 is Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday. Monday is day number 9. Day number 10 is Sunday. Time period cannot end on a weekend or holiday, so we stop on Sunday, we stop going backwards, and we move forward on the calendar to the next business day, which is a Monday. And if you're wondering why we would have this kind of goofy system, it's not intuitive to say you stop and start moving forward again. Why did we do that? Pretty simple reason why. All of you are held to the standard of care of a lawyer when you prepare purchase and sale agreements. Lawyers and judges have a mechanism, a model for counting days backwards from a trial date to determine when witness lists or anything else are due prior to trial. And the court rules say when the final day is a weekend or holiday, you stop counting backwards and you move forward on the calendar to the next business day. Since you're held to the standard of care of a lawyer, and since lawyers and judges already have a model for counting days backwards, that was the model incorporated into the statewide form system. If you have questions on how to count days backwards from closing or anything else, send an email to me, legalhotline@warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington Realtor member.